The Brazilian state of Mato Grosso is a giant in the field of agriculture. Cotton, rice, sugarcane and corn all grow here, and it's also Brazil's largest producer of genetically modified soybeans, as well as the undisputed record holder in pesticide use. Brazil imports more biocides, or agrotoxins, as they're called by opponents, than almost any country in the world. And the central western state of Mato Grosso consistently ranks at the top in pesticide use.
This river initially looks inviting and makes you want to swim in it. But I've analyzed the water and I would never go in, as tempting as it looks.
Apesar de adorar.
You can't see the toxins. They're invisible. The river looks pristine and untouched. But our lab tests have found traces of chemicals in the water. Some pesticides stay longer in the environment and especially in water. So it's an important indicator, which we carefully monitor.
Então, é indicador ambiental importante da gente monitorar também.
Brazil has authorized the use of 3,669 different pesticides. The country is a veritable El Dorado for chemical companies, especially for European ones, as many products prohibited in the EU may be sprayed on Brazilian fields.
They make billions selling highly dangerous pesticides, most of which are banned here.
20% of the poison victims in Brazil are children and young people under 19, even infants. It's a form of infanticide.
Something is clearly not right. We can't build a fortress around Europe to protect the health of our citizens while damaging the health of Brazilians. That creates moral and ethical problems.
We import produce that was grown using these dangerous pesticides. We end up with traces of pesticides on our plates that we've banned in France, Germany, and elsewhere.
Well, there's a very good reason, and it's called money.
Jair Bolsonaro was elected president of the Federative Republic of Brazil in October 2018. Bolsonaro is a former paratrooper and guaranteed free rein to the agricultural industry. Almost as soon as he was in power, heads of agribusiness gathered to celebrate his victory, and Bolsonaro promised them his loyalty.
I'd like to say that I'm at your service. You are our bosses. We are completely on your side to fight for you.
The deforestation of the Amazon was accelerated to clear way for even more farming. More than 900,000 hectares of rainforest went up in smoke in 2019 alone. Brazil is overflowing with biocides, making it an attractive market for multinational chemical companies. Companies like Swiss agribusiness giant Syngenta, as well as Germany's BASF and Bayer, which acquired its American rival Monsanto in 2018. Their ads depict an idealized world: clean air, healthy food, and a way forward towards sustainable agriculture, while leaving out their smoky chemical plants.
I think it's really important that agriculture not only feeds the world, but also does it in a way that takes care of our planet.
These three multinationals alone had over 100 billion euros in sales in 2019, and a charity based in Lausanne has been keeping an eye on them.
What? Way too expensive. I need lower prices. I don't care how.
For more than 50 years, Public Eye has monitored Swiss companies in developing nations, and it published a map in 2020 detailing the global activities of all three, Syngenta, Bayer and BASF.
The pesticide market is very lucrative, with annual sales in the tens of billions. It's also highly secretive. Hardly any sales figures are publicly available. Companies have always managed to hide behind those notorious business secrets and keep their data confidential. This map was actually the first time we managed to publish a complete record of exports.
The numbers are dizzying. In 2018, the three European companies sold more than 80,000 tons of pesticides containing substances banned in European fields. 90% are produced in the United Kingdom, Italy, the Netherlands, Germany, France, Belgium, and Spain.
A third of pesticides sold in 2018 were highly dangerous, carcinogenic, toxic to bees, or with hormone-disrupting effects. 40 dangerous substances that are banned from our fields were authorized for export that year, with a total volume of more than 80,000 tons. That's not insignificant. That's huge.
Is this hypocrisy or cynicism? The EU's double standard has found fertile ground in Brazil. Back in Mato Grosso, the landscape here is monotonous, but it used to be part of a tropical savanna known as the Cerrado. Now, it's just endless soybean and cotton fields. Few animals remain, mainly just tractors and airplanes spraying pesticides as they traverse the fields. The EU banned aerial crop spraying a long time ago, but Brazil has yet to take similar action. The town of Sapezal was founded just 30 years ago as soy, corn and cotton boomed. Sapezal's soundtrack is the never-ending cacophony of trucks transporting agricultural products. These huge warehouses belong to Brazil's largest agrochemical companies. Sapezal is the leader in pesticides use in Mato Grosso, but the area also has an unusually high suicide rate and is known as the capital of depression. Professor Marcia Montanari, a nutritionist, has an appointment at the Andre Antonio Maggi School, named after the Brazilian soybean tycoon who financed the construction of the school. The staff knows the professor well. She has been analysing the town's tap water for 6 years, water that more than 1,000 school children drink every day of the week. According to Brazilian law, residues of 27 pesticides are allowed in drinking water, but Marcia Montanari has found others.
In addition to the 27 pesticides that are allowed by law in drinking water, we are also looking for the pesticides used most often in Mato Grosso. We monitor the wells in Sapezal, and we found pesticide residues in every second well below the groundwater level. The wells where schools get their drinking water. We mainly found metolachlor and atrazine. We even found them in rainwater.
Atrazine is a herbicide which has been banned in Europe since 2003. Metolachlor is classified by the EU as a probable carcinogen.
The results of Marcia's study were shocking. All of us who work at the school were disturbed. But the agricultural sector can continue doing business as usual.
Nothing has been done to protect the water?
No.
No change?
No. Not that I know of. That would only happen if we stopped using pesticides. But this is an agricultural region. People's livelihoods depend on it. It's important, economically speaking, and it's in the hands of agribusiness. Attitudes won't change.
You can tell that the local administration is focused on agro-industry. It's a very sensitive issue for the people and for officials here.
We asked corporate farmers in Sapezal for an interview, but the corporations, whose storage silos mark the landscape, declined our requests. But we did get a response from Scariote, a family business founded in 2008. One of the managers, Claudio Scariote, is also the city's deputy mayor. After some initial hesitation, he agreed to give us a tour, which he assured us complies with all environmental regulations.
We do everything we can to protect the environment. In our rivers, the water is so clear that you can see the bottom at a depth of 10 meters. Why? Because you can't grow anything on the riverbanks. Those areas are under permanent protection. We producers have to make sure pesticides are never used near the banks. That's why our waters are so clean. The silos.
Scariote alternates between growing corn and soybeans.
You can film here. This is corn.
The silos still contain the last tons waiting to be sold. Claudio Scariote uses any available pesticide to grow produce.
Do you use atrazine for the corn?
Pardon?
Atrazine.
Atrazine, yes. After the soy harvest, you have to get the soil ready for the corn.
Is that really necessary?
Yes. We used to use more atrazine. We use less now.
Why?
We mix atrazine with glyphosate. We use only half the amount today and achieve the same effect. But next year, I think we will have problems, because glyphosate can't be delivered at the moment.
To replace the glyphosate, the farmer is considering using a comparable herbicide called paraquat, which is highly controversial.
So far, we've really not used it. But if we run out of glyphosate next year, we'll have to. Paraquat quickly volatilizes, and depending on the wind and weather, can destroy crops on neighboring fields.
Is it prohibited?
Yes.
Is that a problem for you?
It's still being discussed. Just yesterday, there was another debate here. I didn't understand everything. But if paraquat is banned and we don't have any more glyphosate, what should we use?
People appear to have realized that a ban is inevitable, and now there are enormous stocks of this substance being hoarded in Brazil. So now there's the added challenge of banning the sale of these stocks as well. What else will they do with it?
The controversial pesticides will continue to be used for the time being, and few questions will be asked. In this kingdom of soybeans and pesticides, laws only appear to be suggestions. A farmer sprays pesticides on the side of the road. breaking laws about the proper application of pesticides.
Look, they're spraying less than 50 meters from the road. You're not allowed to plant soy so close to the road, and certainly not to spray there. That's very dangerous for people's health.
We continued our journey. Suddenly, there was a plane flying low over a soybean field. It sprayed a yellow substance, a further infraction, this time against aerial spraying regulations.
He didn't stop spraying.
We kept the windows closed and filmed from inside the car to protect ourselves from the toxic mist. Aircraft spraying pesticides are legally required to cease spraying whenever flying over roads or populated areas.
He flew over the street without checking whether anyone was passing underneath. We saw how that motorcyclist practically drove through the spray. For people on these roads or working these fields, this creates a big health risk. Plus, it ignores Brazilian law. It even shows contempt for the law. And it's happening because there's no one trying to detect and stop such violations from happening.
Back in Sapezal, Claudio Scariotti has changed his mind since we first spoke to him.
I regret having let you film, even if it wasn't much.
Why? What could we do?
Look, I only gave you a few harmless bits of information about how things are run around here. As for the technical things, I can't say much.
One more question about the water. Do you know the results of the water quality studies here?
You can see that the water is clean. Go down to the Rio Juruena, just around the corner. You'll see it's crystal clear, no pollution, no residue. There's no need to take samples, because it's obvious that the water is clean.
Do you drink tap water?
Of course, it's clean.
Claudio Scariotti's statement suggests that farming has no impact on the water quality in Sapezal. But Marcia Montanari's analysis tells a very different story. She found 40 different pesticides in 56% of the rainwater samples and 83% of the tap water samples. The water contamination isn't limited to rural areas. The megacity of Sao Paulo is also affected. It has a metro area population of more than 20 million, or about 1/10 of the Brazilian population. Ana Aranha is an investigative journalist covering the agribusiness industry. Laurent Gabriel from Public Eye suggested she look into the quality of tap water in Brazilian cities.
It all started with a call from Laurent, who told me they wanted to study pesticides. He asked me if I drink tap water. I was a bit surprised by the question, but then he told me that our tap water is contaminated with pesticides. That rattled me because I was pregnant at the time. So I stopped drinking filtered water and started buying bottled water. And I, of course, agreed to work with Laurent and started researching the problem.
Ana Aranha used public information to create a map of drinking water contamination in Brazil, starting with the state of Sao Paulo and its capital.
In Sao Paulo, my hometown, the first thing that caught my eye was atrazine. It's detectable in the city's tap water. And the data collected between 2014 and 2017 showed that of the 27 pesticides studied, all were found in Sao Paulo's tap water.
Of these 27 pesticides, 19 are banned in the EU. Sao Paulo's tap water would be considered undrinkable in Europe. Ana Aranha published her research in 2018. It showed that tap water is contaminated in every second Brazilian city. The news sparked a media firestorm, but little lasting change.
To me, this is really worrying. Once again, I had that feeling which has troubled me since the beginning of my career as a journalist in Brazil. You expose a serious problem, but then that doesn't lead to a public discussion. The study got a big response. Over 500,000 viewers visited our website. Over 400 media outlets covered the topic, contacted us, and reported on the situation on a regional level in other cities. That was really good. But then afterwards, the debate just dissipated.
Paraquat and atrazine are the most frequently used pesticides. Both are also produced by Syngenta, and both substances are used in Mato Grosso. The two herbicides were developed in Switzerland in the 1960s and were popular by the end of the 20th century despite their negative reputation. The EU finally banned atrazine in 2003, but Brazil hasn't.
Atrazine is a good example of European hypocrisy. It was banned in the early 2000s in Europe because it contaminates the groundwater. But even now, 15, 20 years later, it's still one of the most commonly detected pesticides in European drinking water. Atrazine is an endocrine disruptor, which means that even in very small quantities, it can disrupt hormone levels and affect the reproductive system. Every pesticide included in our investigation is a substance that was used in Europe until European authorities took it off the market because of its risks.
The herbicide atrazine, harmful for both our health and the environment, brings back memories of a disaster in Basel, Switzerland in 1986. A fire started in a warehouse that belonged to Sandoz, a chemical and pharmaceutical company.
For over 2 hours, the flames lit up Basel's sky, reaching heights of over 50 meters.
Firefighters needed 20,000 cubic meters of water to extinguish the fire, but the water carried the highly toxic chemicals that had been stored in the warehouse into the Rhine River, including 400 kilograms of atrazine. Lasting contamination was unavoidable, and the people of Basel were angry and frustrated.
Why are you defending yourself? Why don't you just apologize?
Under public pressure, Sandoz, which would later become Novartis, from which Syngenta would emerge, had to relocate its production to the United States. The company then sold atrazine in Europe for another 16 years. Just like atrazine, the use of paraquat is also forbidden in the EU, but not its production. Paraquat is manufactured in England. In 2018, it made up 1/3 of the volume of substances the EU has banned for use, but still cynically exports to the rest of the world.
Paraquat is an extremely toxic herbicide that was developed in the 1960s. So it's been on the market for almost 60 years. This herbicide is so toxic that swallowing just 1 teaspoon is fatal. Every year, this herbicide poisons thousands of farmers in developing countries who use it without proper protective gear and inhale it, or their skin comes into contact with it.
But paraquat is still approved for use in some countries. Understanding how these products are assessed and sold can help explain the discrepancy. Pesticides are reviewed by local agencies around the world. In Europe, that agency is the European Food Safety Authority, or EFSA.
In Europe, we have regulatory agencies that have enough experts and resources to, at the very least, read the files. But you can imagine what it's like in countries that don't have the resources to do their own risk assessment. In developing countries, there's an average of 3 people for that, and in some, there's no one at all. That's 0 to 3 people who are tasked with assessing the risks of pesticide and approving or disapproving the use of certain substances in their country. In the EU and the US, there are 100 to 300 doing the same thing. And even then, evaluation is difficult because the data is supplied by the industry.
The manufacturers of pesticides are often both judge and jury, as well as scientific experts who study the potential toxicity of the pesticides and submit their evaluations to the agencies. Géraldine Coutard is the former director of a European Agricultural Trade Association. She says this insular system isn't problematic.
Of course, companies provide the data. They're required to do so by law. We have to share our studies with the agencies. Each dossier has thousands of pages. But I don't think the agencies lack the capacity to evaluate them.
That's the sector's main argument, that pesticides are heavily regulated, so there can't be any problems. But that's where the big lie comes in. The pesticide risks are determined according to studies the industry carried out on their own products, confidentially. An independent entity can't check the data given to the regulator. And each time studies have been made public, following a court investigation in the US, or by regulators, for example, contradictions and false claims have been found.
One particularly troubling story was made public by a whistleblower who was a long-time Syngenta employee. John Halings says the government agencies were deceived for over 60 years. The toxicologist claims ICI, a British chemical company, falsified data on paraquat. ICI's pharmaceutical division eventually became AstraZeneca, then combined its agricultural business with that of pharmaceutical rival Novartis, forming the world's largest agricultural company, Syngenta. Halings was hired in 1986 to make paraquat less dangerous.
Paraquat actually is probably the most deadly pesticide which has ever been made. And there are some nasty pesticides out there. Paraquat is absorbed from the gut very quickly. After drinking, within 1 hour, you have the highest blood level. So we then thought, if you can remove the paraquat from the stomach, this would be a good approach. So I already knew that there was an emetic agent in the formulation. So I thought, well, there's already emetic in there. Why doesn't the emetic remove the gel in the stomach? Is there something wrong with the dose of the emetic or the concentration?
John Halings went back to the first studies carried out in 1977. They showed that even at high doses, an emetic, a substance that causes vomiting, would not take effect for 2 hours. Too late, because ingestion leads to death within an hour. Syngenta had falsified the findings in the official report.
It had replaced some of the vomiting data from the clinical trial with other data from other patient trials, and totally ignored the fact that the dose level that they were recommending actually didn't work in humans. So I was quite astounded.
Yet when John Halings alerted his managers,
they said to me that this would be very, very damaging for the reputation of not just the Central Toxicology Laboratory, but the company as a whole. And because I had discovered a new formulation with a high emetic, maybe this would solve it.
But 9 years later, he was to learn the truth. The more effective formula that John Halings had found was never used. He found out in 1995 when paraquat was being reviewed as required under EU law, and he checked the file supplied by the company.
And when I looked through this, I thought, hang on a minute, this still has the original fabricated data that is incorrect, and it's citing the same report which was written in 1977, which is incorrect. So I gave a detailed, probably 2 or 3 page response to agrochemicals saying, you cannot use this. Didn't you know that there was a problem? Nothing. I had nothing back, almost like nothing had happened. But in the EU, in 1995, they used the false data for re-registration and kept it on the market for another 10 years, with hundreds of people poisoned across Europe before they banned it.
Why, according to you, why haven't they changed the level of emetic?
Well, there's a very good reason, and it's called money. The cost of doing that was so prohibitive that they said this would destroy the group profits, i.e. ICI Group, for paraquat.
It wasn't until 2007 that the European Union banned paraquat. Following a transitional period, Brazil banned it in 2020, but it's still available in the US, India, and South Africa. According to estimates by a toxicologist at the University of Edinburgh, paraquat has now killed almost 10,000 people. The EFSA, the European Chemical Watchdog, declined to be interviewed. Back to Brazil, to Ceará in the northeast. In the early 2000s, the fruit industry came to the Limoeiro do Norte region. Villages were soon surrounded by banana fields, including Tomé, home to 2,500. The consequences were devastating. Aircraft sprayed pesticides in the air, leaving residents helpless against the toxic chemicals. In 2008, Zé Maria de Tomé decided to fight the illegal spraying. He quickly became a media fixture.
This is a tough fight, and we are caught in its crossfire. The agricultural industry in this region has shown us no understanding. They just want to pocket the profits.
The planes were not allowed to spray within 200 meters of the village, but they flew right over us. People found the white trailing streaks beautiful and ran outside to look at them. I had 150 chickens in my garden, and 80 of them died in one day. The plane flew by, the chickens began to stagger, and then they died. Say Maria once said, "In 10 years, I may not be alive, but you will see people getting cancer, children being born with birth defects, and terrible diseases, because we have no protection against the agrotoxins."
Zé Maria de Tormé was right. 2 years later, he was killed, shot by the side of the road. The assailant was arrested, but the person who allegedly hired him, a large-scale landowner, was acquitted. Just as Zé Maria feared, the frequency of serious illness has risen. The cancer rate is almost 40% higher, according to a local study. Ada Pontes is a medical researcher at the University of Ceará. She has found her own way to continue the fight.
After environmental activist Zé Maria de Tormé was murdered in 2010, people were really afraid to give interviews. It took a lot of patience and an intense dialogue with local residents.
Com os moradores e moradoras da comunidade.
Lucia is the mother of a young daughter who suffers from premature puberty.
Here she is during her last visit to the pediatrician.
She's got so big.
This was last month.
And such beautiful hair.
She's almost as tall as the doctor.
Very pretty.
She's grown.
I miss her.
Her daughter was only 18 months old when she started showing signs of puberty.
Her chest got bigger and harder. After several exams, it turned out that her breasts had begun growing due to premature hormonal changes. She's 8 years old and already has pubic hair, and her body is developed. There's no cure.
Ada Pontes says other more serious abnormalities can be found in Tormé.
How are you?
Good.
What's his name?
João.
A handsome boy, and so tall.
He's 5 months old.
João's mother also had another baby, Sofia, who was born with a serious birth defect.
All mothers get to see their baby after birth. I didn't. I had a good doctor, but it was terrible. I could see it on his face. He said, Sofia will not live more than 3 days. She was born with 2 holes in her heart. She didn't make it. She died. I was so scared that I never wanted to be a mother again. But God is wonderful that He gave me a healthy and beautiful baby. He's my life. Aren't you, my darling?
Diane's daughter had a congenital heart defect. Several factors could be to blame for this. Genetic or familial factors, but also environmental factors. And in the latter category, pesticides play a major role. Here in Tormé, we have had 5 cases of congenital malformations in less than 2 years. It's a small community with about 2,500 residents. Compared to the national level, malformations are much more common here. That's why we're asked whether there is a link with the pesticides.
The researcher has investigated the extent to which families were exposed to pesticides before their children were born. Her findings are revealing. Lucia worked at a school surrounded by fields that were sprayed.
Airplanes flew above the school spraying pesticides. The fumes penetrated into the building, and the children in the classroom complained about the stench. Some had skin irritations afterwards, swelling or itching. Others reported headaches and nausea.
Lucia's husband had even more contact. He worked directly on the aircraft.
He would really smell bad. He'd come home and shower and wash with a lot of soap. But even with the perfume he used to cover the stench, he still smelled terrible. His skin smelled like poison, as if his body was exuding it. At some point, he began to feel bad. Then his liver became inflamed.
Tieni, the mother of little Sophia, who died just days after she was born, was caught by a spray of pesticide at the beginning of her pregnancy. A plane had flown over her and doused her in chemicals. Her husband, who was also frequently exposed, didn't want to speak with us on camera. Ada Pontes has little doubt that pesticides caused these tragedies.
We found pyrethroid metabolites in these children's urine. Pyrethroids are a type of pesticide. Recent studies show that prolonged exposure to pyrethroids, even small doses, can lead to health problems such as congenital defects or premature puberty.
In addition to frustration, I feel a sense of sadness, and sometimes also anger. I imagine how different life could be if farmers didn't just think about their profits. These people don't live here. Their children don't go to school here. They don't have relatives here. All they care about is getting rich. They take from our soil without any consideration.
But there are times when politics triumphs. In 2018, Renato Roseno, a government official in Ceará, passed a law prohibiting aerial chemical spraying in the whole state. Large-scale farmers immediately launched a counterattack.
The strategy of agrobusiness is to overturn the law in the Supreme Court because they don't want it to go into effect in other states. Several legislatures in other states are discussing similar laws, inspired by our progress. And if we win in the Supreme Court, that will naturally encourage the other states to enact similar laws.
And Renato Roseno has further plans. He wants to see pesticides taxed.
Pesticides are not subject to any tax. When you buy aspirin at the pharmacy, you pay at least 17% VAT. When you buy glyphosate, you pay none. That's absurd and shameful. The state promotes the production and use of pesticides.
Above all, he wants to end the EU's double standards.
Why can something that's banned in Europe be used here? That's hypocrisy. This neoliberal model, this global division of the economy, has led to certain regions being sacrificed, regions that are now home to all the dirty work. And who bears the cost for that? The people. And they pay with their health. The EU must review its trade standards and stop big corporations from selling substances here that are banned in the EU.
Trump has confronted the democratic institutions, the separation of powers.
Larissa Bombardi is a Brazilian geographer who was invited to Brussels. She urged the EU not to turn a blind eye.
Bom dia. Hello. It's a pleasure to be here. According to official figures, more than 500 babies have been poisoned by pesticides in Brazil. But by now, it could be more than 25,000 poisoned babies. I got the feeling that I was able to make the MEPs more aware of the issue. It's inhumane to sell something abroad that is banned in the EU. After all, is the Brazilian population worth less? 20% of the poison victims in Brazil are children and young people under 19, even infants. This is a form of infanticide. And I use that word deliberately because that's what the numbers prove. 500 infants poisoned by pesticides. How can that be?
The Brazilian agricultural industry was not happy that she went public with her criticism. She decided to leave Brazil after she received threats on her life. About 50 environmental activists are murdered every year in Brazil. She now lives in Europe. In Brussels, MEPs have written to the European Commission to put an end to this toxic cycle.
For me, these chemical companies are criminals. MEPs must take action to stop them. And right now we're fighting so that the production, storage, and transport of a substance are prevented the moment it is found to be toxic.
The Commission acknowledged that the situation is absurd and said they would respond and take steps to ban the production and export of highly dangerous pesticides.
The EU has the power to bring about real change, but that change remains a distant hope.
Banning the import of food produced with banned pesticides would send a strong signal for change on the ground. If coffee or orange exports are stopped at the border because they contain residues of substances banned in Europe, it could lead to real change towards gentler, safer production methods.
UN Special Rapporteur Marcos Orellana also supports this request by MEPs and NGOs. But the EU Commission has yet to begin drafting the legislation. Meanwhile, in France, the production and export of highly hazardous pesticides has been banned since January 2022. Though there are exceptions. The German parliament rejected a motion to stop pesticide exports in March 2021. And over in Brazil, the land of pesticides, a new day may be dawning. A group of small independent farmers, known as the Landless Workers Movement, has become one of the world's largest producers of organic rice, grown entirely without chemical products.
Up until 2001, I worked with my family growing tobacco and other produce using conventional farming methods. But then I started having a lot of health problems, probably due to the pesticides and poisons I was using. That prompted me to change things and lead a healthier life. We've now been growing certified organic rice for 18 years. At first we were just a few families, but every year more joined. Now we're in the process of building a partnership with a management company, and we now have more than 200 families producing our rice.
Mais de 200 famílias hoje envolvidas e produtoras de arroz.
It's a huge victory. It's a fight for justice. It is possible to have enough food for Brazil's population and to have food security, with high-quality produce that is free of pesticides. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a very exciting development, which shows us that this is possible.
Brazil's so-called landless farmers have rediscovered the joy of working with nature rather than against it. They are showing the way forward towards a better future for their health, their country, and our planet.